Okay, everyone, I just want to welcome you to 107 Cafe. Here tonight, we are having an evening with Marvin Elkind, also known as the Weasel. Marvin had been known as a very, very loyal and reliable driver to mobsters, heads of state, celebrities, and those would include Jimmy Hoffa, Golda Meir, Jean Chrétien, among others, and Muhammad Ali. And so he's going to share some of the stories with us tonight. And when we're done, we'll open up the floor and you can ask some questions. But what a lot of people wouldn't have known at the time was in the middle of his career as a driver, he had turned into an informant for the OPP and then acted as an undercover informant for agencies such as the FBI, the Mexican Federales, Scotland Yard, and the RCMP. So,
and the FBI.
And the FBI, twice. Marvin actually acted undercover for over 250 cases, 249 of which ended up in successful prosecutions. I'm just going to give you a very, very brief history of Marvin's childhood, and then he's going to start telling about his story. So Marvin ended up in foster care at a young age, age 7. Age 9. And from age 9 to 11, his foster family was a family called the Pasquale family. And it may not be known to you, but it's a well-known crime family in Ontario. His foster brother was Roy Pasquale, who ended up being the number 2 mobster in Ontario. And he also spent a little bit of time in Italy during that period and met the Pasquale family renamed him to Mario Pasquale. And he actually met his real namesake in Sicily, Mario Pasquale, during that time. He then spent some time in juvenile detention, and when he got out, he eventually found his way into boxing, and through some of those family connections, ended up in New York City boxing semi-professionally. So Marvin, to take it from there, you're a young boxer in New York City, you're 18, 19 years old, and what was that like?
I went to New York with false dreams, like a lot of kids, thinking New York City was the mecca of boxing in those days. And I had dreams of becoming a champion, something I couldn't become. But through connections, I was able to get a job as a busboy at the Copacabana, one which I enjoyed very much. And I also had some fights down there in St. Nicholas Arena, and I worked as a sparring partner at Stillman's Gym for some great fighters. And that happened when I was in New York. I was 18 years old when I moved to New York.
And so the job at the Copa, you met some interesting characters?
Now, when I worked at the Copa, you had to be a member of the Teamsters Union to work at the Copa. The Teamsters was not, like a lot of people think, just truckers, had a lot of different deals. And the Copa was organized, and if you wanted to work at the Copa, you had to be a member of the Teamsters. Now, when I worked at the Copa, a group of Mr. Hoffa's associates, and their names was Frankie Carbo, Tony Salerno, Blakey Palermo, Albert Anastasia, and when he was in town, Sam Salvatore Giancana. They used to come in 4 or 5 times a week to see the show and eat and drink because they didn't pay. And everybody knew who they were.
So the people here know who they are. Tony Salerno, for example, is known as Fat Tony.
Tony Salerno was Fat Tony Salerno. He was the number 2 man to Don Vito Genovese, who at that time was he was the head Don of New York State, and probably outside of Italy, the most powerful Italian Don in the world. Very well connected, very powerful man. And Tony Salerno was his consigliere. He was next to him. And these guys knew that everybody knew them. And they were scared of them because of who they were. So they used to put on an act scaring people, yelling at them, shouting at them. But I knew they weren't going to do anything. They were just there for a good time. And they were very big tippers. So when other people ran away from serving them, I ran towards them. Because I knew as much as they threatened and yelled, it was all a show just for their fun. And they were big tippers, so I took good care of them. Now, it was on a Wednesday, and they knew me for a couple of reasons. One, that I was a busboy at the Copa, and I took good care of them, very good care. And they used to go to the boxing matches an awful lot, and I fought preliminary fights, so they knew me from that. One day, I'm there working at the Copa. It was on a Wednesday, and Tony Salerno yells, "Hey, little Jew boy, get over here." I ran over to the table. I said, "Yes, Mr. Salerno." Now, the Copa was owned by Lou Walters, Barbara Walters' father. He owned the Copa. He says, "We spoke to Lou Walters. Friday's your last day here." I said, "Friday's my last day. I'm trying so hard to do a good job. Why?" He says, "As of Monday, you've got a new job. You're going to be the driver for Jimmy Hoffa." Now, I had never met Mr. Hoffa. I had heard a lot of stories about him. Probably some true, some not true. But the idea scared me. So my remark was, I don't want to be Hoffa's driver. His answer to me was, "Nobody's asking you." Now, he told me the reason they picked me was Hoffa's driver had just been drafted into the Army. Me being a Canadian, they didn't have to worry about that. So that's why they picked me. I told them, I said, "But I don't know the streets." They said, "Hoffa is a creature of habit. He goes to the same places all the time. You'll learn it very quickly. You won't have any problem." Now, on Saturday, they picked me up. Now, Hoffa's drivers were not allowed to wear shirts and ties. You had to wear a sport shirt and a sport jacket. And you wore this gold chain, gold rope chain, to show you were his slave. And that had to be visible. So they picked me up on Saturday. They took me to a menswear store. I remember it was called Little David's. And they bought me blazers and slacks and shirts and a coat and a hat. And they took me to a jewelry store and they got me the chain. They showed me where I would pick up the car to get Mr. Hoffa. Now, Mr. Hoffa had two passions in life. His union, which he was very, very lovable to, and his family. He was a great family man. Mr. Hoffa went home to Detroit every Friday, late in the day, and spent Friday night, Saturdays, and Sunday with his family, and he would come back to New York on Monday to run the union out of New York. So they showed me where he would get off at the plane to pick him up when he comes in and to take care of him. Sunday night, I was in my room in the boarding house I was living in, and I knew the next day I had to pick up the Cadillac and pick up Mr. Hoffa, and I was terrified. I phoned home, and I asked my mother, I said, "Ma, I'm scared to death. I'm starting this new job. I'm scared. Can I come home?" She said, "Your stepfather won't let you come home. You can't come home. Do the best you can. You can't come home." So Monday I went and I picked up the car. It was a beautiful big black Cadillac Fleetwood Broom, bulletproof. I picked up the car and I went to the airport. and I went to where Mr. Hoffa would be getting off the plane. I had pictures of Mr. Hoffa. I knew what he looked like anyway. He came off. I pulled the car up. I got out and I opened up the back door and I said, "Good morning, Mr. Hoffa." He says to me, "Are you Marvin?" I go, "Yes, sir." He goes, "Good answer. Very good start. Mr. Hoffa or sir. Don't forget that. You're off to a very good start." And he got in the car. He says, "Now, Marvin, I want you to drive over there." And he points it to his direction. I drove to a place. 2 guys came out, and they got in the back of the car with Mr. Hoffa, one on each side of him. These were his bodyguards. Then Mr. Hoffa says, "Marvin, pull the car over and turn it off." I did that. He says, "Now turn around." I turn around, and he says, "Boys, show Marvin." They opened up their coats to show me they were carrying guns. He says, "Now, Marvin, I've got rules, and I've got cardinal rules. You break a rule, these guys will beat the hell out of you. You break a cardinal rule, you won't be around the next morning. Now, here's the rules. I don't want to hear rainstorm, thunderstorm, snowstorm. I don't want to hear anything like that. You must never be late when you're picking me up. After you pick me up, if circumstances make us late, that's okay. I must not be kept waiting. That's the rule. The cardinal rule is what you hear in this car stays in this car. If that doesn't happen, you're not around the next day." And we went from there.
Well, that's somewhere to go to. So, but you did overhear some things in that car, didn't you?
Now, there was no blockage between the driver's side and the passenger side. It was wide open. So I heard many things. Now, Mr. Hoffa had a lot of meetings in the back of the car. Mr. Hoffa, the whole 4 years I was with him, never spoke to me. He yelled. Whatever he wanted, he yelled. And he was in the back of the car one day with the head Don of New York State, very powerful man called Don Vito Genovese. And they made the deal where Mr. Hoffa would loan money from pension funds to Don Vito's people. They would put it out in the street at interest rates of 5% a week. They would not pay Mr. Hoffa interest, but they would pay the money back, and they did. In turn, they would give Mr. Hoffa muscle men to go on the picket lines using other people's names so they could fight the people going against the picket lines. That was the deal that was made. Now, Don Vito had a reputation of being a very ruthless person. He spoke to me like he was my grandfather. One day we were driving, and he was in the back of the car with Mr. Hoffa, and Mr. Hoffa yelled at me. He says, "You didn't make that turn the way I told you. Why didn't you turn there?" He started yelling at me. Don Vito Genovese says, "Jimmy, Marvin's a very good boy. Don't yell at the boy. The boy tries very hard. He's a good boy." A couple of days later, I'm driving them, and we were driving in the Garment District in Manhattan. And Don Vito says to Mr. Hoffa, he says, "Jimmy, that manufacturer from the boys were, he's cooperating?" "Yes." Mr. Hoffa said, "No, he's not." He says, "Then he's got to go." The next day, they found the guy dead. After that, I made up my mind, I'll make sure that this old guy keeps liking me.
You're still here.
Still made it.
So I know you weren't hired as muscle, really, but I mean, there's some circumstances where you had to, I guess, protect Mr. Hoffa, and I'm thinking of one circumstance specifically when there was an attempt on his life.
Now, here's what happened. Mr. Hoffa had a meeting with somebody that I would call probably the most evil person in the world, Albert Anastasia. Albert Anastasia was the enforcer for Murder Incorporated. He loved hurting people. He was just a very bad, evil person, but they did business. And they had a meeting scheduled in Manhattan at Salerno's barbershop. It was a big barbershop, 25 chairs, and the deal was they sit on chairs next to each other. They're both going to get a haircut. They have the meeting as they're doing that. When we got to the barbershop, I says to Mr. Hoffa, Mr. Hoffa, I don't like what I see. He says, what's bothering you? I said, there's a station wagon. I've never seen it here before. A car down the street, I've never seen it here before. It doesn't feel right. He says, drive on the parking lot and see if Anastasia is here. Now, I had a phone in the car. We didn't have cell phones in those days, but I had a giant aerial on the trunk, and I had a phone in the car. We pulled in the parking lot, and I see Anastasia's car. So he says, what do you think, Marvin? I says, Mr. Hoffa, I feel you shouldn't go in. He says, all right, phone Albert and tell him. I phoned to the barbershop, and I got Mr. Anastasia on the phone. I said, Mr. Anastasia, it's Marvin, Mr. Hoffa's driver. Mr. Hoffa won't be coming in. He says, well, that's his business. I'm staying. Less than 2 hours later, 4 guys entered the barbershop. 2 of them pumped 8 bullets into the back of Albert Anastasia and the barber chair. And they pumped 8 bullets into the empty chair where Mr. Hoffa was supposed to be. The next day, the New York Times, in the headline said, Hoffa's driver outwits hitmen. Now, I was very proud of myself of what I did. So I said to Mr. Hoffa, great job I did. He says, what are you talking about? I said, well, the fact that I spotted there was problems and I told you not to go in was, Marvin, that's your job. You just did your job. If you let me go in, you wouldn't have been doing your job. You didn't do anything so terrific. You did your job.
Well, I think you did more than your job that day. But there came a time when Hoffa had to kind of go underground. He was in a bit of trouble, and you found your way. The Teamsters then assigned you to Montreal. You did about a year there, and then you were then assigned back to your hometown of Toronto.
What happened was this. Mr. Hoffa, in '56, had to get lost for a year. There was a lot of subpoenas out for him he didn't want to answer. And a lot of people wanted to talk to him he didn't want to talk to. He had to get lost for a year. They told me I could stay in New York and drive for other people. But there was an opening in Montreal to drive for the head of the Quebec Mafia, Victor Catroni. They said, do you want that job? And I said, yeah, sure. I went there and I drove the year for Victor Catroni in Montreal. Victor Catroni was a man of respect. I liked working for him. And then they told me there was an opening back in Toronto to drive the Teamster president for Canada, Tommy Corrigan. Do I want the job? So I said, yes, I'll take the job. So I came back in Toronto and I went to work for the Teamster president of Canada, Tom Corrigan.
So this is at the time when you were known as a very loyal servant, a loyal driver. And at the same time, your daughter was getting married.
Now, here's what happened. My daughter, my younger daughter, was living with a guy. They weren't married. Now, due to the fact that I did all the wrong things in my life, I wanted my daughters to do the right thing. There's nothing worse than a reformed drunk. My mother was all right with it. My wife was all right with it. My mother-in-law was all right with it. I wasn't. My mother phoned me up and she said, you know the problem? I said, no, what? She goes, you're old-fashioned. Things are different. I went to my daughter and I said, listen, sweetheart, for your daddy, marry him. She said, Daddy, he doesn't want to get married. I said, then leave him. She said, Daddy, I will not leave him. I love him. If he wants to stay together this way, we'll do it. And give me your word. Give me your word right now. You won't touch him. I want your word. I gave it to her. A week later, I took he's now my son-in-law. I took him to the fights with me. We sat down and there was a chair beside us. He says, who's this for? I said, somebody might join us. In came my dear friend, George Chavalo.
So for those of you who aren't boxing fans, so George Chavalo is a Canadian boxer who fought Muhammad Ali twice, among many other famous boxers. Best boxer probably out of Canada ever.
George was Canadian heavyweight champ for 21 years. Greatest fighter Canada ever produced. And he fought Ali to the distance twice. 2 fantastic fights, Toronto and Vancouver. And he was twice the size, maybe 3 times the size as my future son-in-law. I introduced them. George, being my dear friend, knew how I felt. He put the kid in a headlock and he said, Saul, a wedding or a funeral, your choice. Now,
The weddings get expensive though, don't they?
the way it was done was the bride's father was supposed to pay for the wedding. I was busted. I didn't have any money. The kid's father had dough. My daughter comes to me and she says, how will you feel if his father pays for the wedding? I said, look, sweetheart, I'll feel awful, but I want you to have a great wedding. So if he wants to make you the wedding, I won't stand in your way. My daughter said, I don't want you to feel bad. We'll get married in the rabbi's study and have a small party at home. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call from a guy from Montreal who I never met in my life. I had just heard of. His name was Irving Cott. Irving Cott was a well-known crooked stock promoter. He got my phone number, phoned me up. He says, I've heard that you're a very reliable person. I've got a deal for you. I'm going to wire you $1,000, buy a return ticket to Montreal and back. Come and see me at the Sheraton Center Hotel in my office. I'll give you the proposal. I said, okay. I flew down to Montreal and I met with Irving Cott. He says, you're the driver for the Teamster President of Canada, Tommy Corrigan. I goes, yes, I am. He says, I'm in a private deal with Tommy Corrigan, and he's got papers that would be very good for me to see. I'd like you to smuggle those papers out to me. I says, I can't do that. I work for the guy. I drive for the guy. I can't do that. He says, I'll give you $20,000. I said, you got a deal. Now, when Tommy Corrigan left his office, he always locked it. And quite often, Tommy Corrigan was originally from New York. I knew he was a dangerous person because he once put a hit on his brother. And I figured if a guy will put a hit on his brother, this is a dangerous guy. So he was going to New York to visit his family. He said, drive me to the airport, and you'll pick me up in a few days when I'm back. I drove him to the airport. I left him off. I come back, and I went to his secretary, and I said, Tommy left some papers in his office that he had to take to New York. He wants me to get them. She says, sure. She opens up the office, lets me in. I rummage through his desk. I find the papers. I put them in my jacket, and I leave. I go to a copy store, not one where they make one at a time, to a copy machine shop. They make me copies, and then I go back, and I told her I delivered the papers to Tommy. I put them back, and I had the papers. And I went to Montreal, met with Irving Cott. He gave me the $20,000. Now, I phoned my future son-in-law's father. Now, that was over 25 years ago. $20,000 made a beautiful wedding. Plus, due to the fact of my position with the Teamsters, I was able to get the flowers for nothing and any limos I needed free of charge. So this is Moisha, my daughter, my responsibility. I'm making the wedding. If you want to contribute, that's fine. If you don't want to contribute, that's fine too. She says, how much money are you going to spend, Marvin? I says, 20,000. He says, where you get? Don't tell me. He said, I don't want to know. Don't tell me where you got it. I'll match you. We had the wedding at a place called the Sutton Place Hotel in Toronto, at the room at the top, which at that time was the leading room in Toronto. The wedding was fantastic. I spent all my money, but I was never so happy in my life.
Wow. So George Chavalo was part of that plan to make you a happy father-in-law, but you also met Muhammad Ali and several other boxers, and maybe can you just let us kind of, because you had a personal relationship with some of these guys.
Now, George Chavalo and I were very dear friends. George had 4 sons. 3 of them died because of drug overdoses. One of them, the eldest one, he was a phys ed teacher. He coached football. George and I used to go to all the games. They won the championship. George and I were the main sparring, the main cheering section. George and I was the godfather to Mitchell's 2 sons. George and I had an extremely close, and still do. I miss him because he's so sick, but we had a very close and very dear relationship. Now, George fought Floyd Patterson in 1965 in New York. It was a war. It was voted Fight of the Year. There was no question in my mind that George won the fight, but it was in Floyd's hometown of New York. George was a former heavyweight champion, and they gave the split decision to Floyd. Muhammad Ali was at the fight. At the intermission, we all stood at the Lowe's Midtown Hotel across the road from Madison Square Garden. And that's where I lived when I worked for the Teamsters in New York. The offices were at the Midtown. Mr. Hoffa had an apartment there. Each of the bodyguards had a room there, and I had a room there. So I had to go across the road and get something. I get in the elevator. There's this bunch of people, and who's also in the elevator? Muhammad Ali. I remember Muhammad looked terrific. He was wearing a beautiful double-breasted gray flannel suit. I said, his name was not Muhammad that long at that time. I says, Mr. Ali, I am George Chavalo's driver. My name is Marvin Elkind. I drive a lot of famous people. If you ever come to Toronto, you've got my services free of charge. It'll be my great pleasure to take care of you. He says, who the hell needs you? If I come to Toronto, I'm not going to call you. As a matter of fact, I'll go out of my way to avoid you. And we left. The next day, we're in the lobby of the hotel after breakfast, and Muhammad is talking to the great Joe Louis. I walk over and I says, champ, I want to shake your hand. Muhammad stuck out his hand. I slapped it away. I said the champ, not you. A year later, George was fighting Ernie Terrell in Toronto, and Muhammad was a guest of the promoter. The day of the weigh-in, Muhammad is there. He was sitting with a friend of his called Bundini Brown. I walked over, Muhammad said, "Marvin," and he stuck out his hand. He says, "That was all an act I put on the elevator. It was just an act. I didn't mean it." I said, "Neither did I. It was an act also." And we became very dear friends. When I turned 70 years old, he made me a birthday party at his farm in Michigan. He gave me this bracelet, 18 karat gold. He had it designed. It's the design of the Hebrew Bible. He had it designed for me, and we became tremendously close friends. When he died, George and I went to the funeral in Louisville. We were known as honorary pallbearers. I miss him.
And thank you for that. So just now we're going to just move into kind of the second phase of your lifetime, I guess, your career from driver. Now there was and I don't really, kind of as a backstory for people, there's a guy named Neil Proverbs that was a fraudster in Canada, and under some duress, maybe threat of charges, Marvin was co-opted to testify against Mr. Proverbs, so he was not also named as a defendant. And that was your first introduction into being a
What happened
Weasel.
was this. Neil Proverbs was one of the greatest con men that ever lived, conning people into stock market deals that didn't exist. One guy that he stole $80,000 from was a kid by the name of Wayne Tannenbaum. Wayne Tannenbaum's father was one of the wealthiest men in Canada, and his son-in-law was the Solicitor General of Canada, Bobby Kaplan. Tannenbaums called the police when they found out it was a fraud. But the fraud that they were pulling was a fraud that he had the Tannenbaums taken part in that they didn't know about. So Bobby Kaplan made the police drop the charges. When the police came in to arrest Neil Proverbs, he wasn't sure who it was. He thought maybe it was somebody that was after him for money he stole from them. So he was waiting for them, and he had a shotgun beside him on the floor. They dropped the fraud charges as they had to, but they did lay the gun charge. Now the trial was starting, and Neil Proverbs' lawyer was a guy called Harvey Salem, who was my lawyer and also later became a judge. He's dead now. Salem says to me, "I'm defending Proverbs. Get out of town. Better yet, get out of the province. Don't be around for any questioning." So I went to Calgary, Alberta, because a friend of mine had a siding company there, and I was selling aluminum siding. One day, there's a knock at the door at my hotel. I was staying at a hotel in Calgary called the Calgary Inn. And I opened the door. Calgary police. She said, "We have a Canada-wide warrant for you for Ontario." He says, "Why?" He says, "We don't know. But it's from the Attorney General of the province of Ontario. It's a Canada-wide warrant to take you back to Ontario." So they took me to jail in Calgary. And I had to go before a bail judge. Now I go before the bail judge, and his name is on the desk, Judge Robert Shapiro. So I said to myself, this is a break. I'm Jewish, he's Jewish. So he says, "How are you today, Mr. Elkind?" I said, "Well, I'd be a lot better if I was in the synagogue, Your Worship." So he says, "So would I." So he says, "Can you give me a reason why I should grant you bail?" I said, "Well, I've been in trouble many times before. I've never missed a court appearance. I've always shown up when I had to. I'm reliable." He said, yeah, but you're from Ontario. Why are you hiding in Calgary? I said, I'm not hiding. I'm working here. He says, you make a lot of sense. Bail denied. As the guard was taking me back to my cell, he says, he didn't have a chance. The OPP are in the building to take you back. He was just going through the formalities. The OPP were there, 2 police officers, the main guy being an inspector by the name of Furnace Savage. And he told me that they got me because they told my calls. They didn't get a warrant for it. Told the calls means that they checked my home lines and they found out calls coming in from the Calgary Inn to my family in Toronto. And that's how they knew where I was. They take me back to Toronto, and they take me to OPP headquarters, and it's about 3 a.m. And they said, call your lawyer. I said, are you nuts? It's 3 a.m. in the morning. He says, he knows we're coming to get you. He's expecting your call. I call my lawyer. He says, where are you? I says, I'm in Toronto. He says, they got you. I says, they got me. He says, look, they are going to charge you with conspiracy on that charge. You can do a long term. But they really don't want you. They want Proverbs. They're going to offer you a deal to testify against Proverbs for them. Accept the deal and you won't do any time. He says, I'm telling you now, accept the deal. I put down the phone and the inspector says, well, I says, give me a sweater and a number and put me on the team.
So you did testify at that trial and you got some headlines for
now
being
when
a
I
very sharp witness.
testified, Proverbs had a lawyer, but he brought in a guy called Dave Humphreys, who at that time was the leading criminal lawyer in Canada, to cross-examine me. And at 11:45, he announced that he was there to cross-examine me. That was his only purpose. He said, I want to study this man's testimony before I cross-examine him. The judge says it's 11:45. We'll break for lunch till 2 o'clock. He says, Mr. Elkind, you're under oath. Don't discuss this case with anybody. Be back here at 2 o'clock. You're under oath. As I was leaving the courtroom, I passed by Humphreys. He says to me, Marvin, you never took a beating in the ring like I'm going to give you. I'm going to tear you to ribbons. When I'm finished with you, you'll be a wreck. And I leave. I go down the street to a hotel. I have 2 vodka martinis on the rocks and a couple of sandwiches. And then I head back to court. Before I get to court, I run into a lawyer by the name of Lissaman. Calls me over, he says, Marvin, it's all over downtown. You're going to be cross-examined by Humphrey. He goes, right. He goes, listen to me. I like you. Humphreys doesn't care about the case. He's not going to question you about the case. He wants to ruin your truthfulness. He's going to ask you a lot of questions about things that you did, bad things. He's going to have all the facts in a paper behind his back. Anytime you lie to him, you're a goner, because he's going to have the truth there. Everybody knows who you are anyway. Don't lie. Catch you in one lie, you're finished. They swear me in, and Humphrey says, in such and such a year, did you do this? I go, oh yeah, I did that. He says, well, such a year, did you do this? I go, yeah, that was me. He asked me another question. He goes, yeah, I did that. Now he's becoming frustrated. So he says to me, well, if you did all those things, you must be a very no good, low down person. So I said, well, I never said I was perfect. The courtroom busted up laughing. Now I'm feeling good. I'm relaxed. I'm enjoying it. And he says to me, you were telling all of these stories to Proverbs. I said, lies. Everything was lies. He says, how did you feel when you were lying to Proverbs? He says, I felt terrific. He says, how come? I said, because I was drunk. He says, are you trying to say the devil made you do it? I said, well, your client bought me the drinks. You want to call him the devil? That's up to you. The next day, headlines in the Toronto Daily Star. Rapid speaking Elkind beats Humphreys to the punch every time. Now, Dave Humphreys held it against me. He was mad at me. Later on, he became a judge. I had to appear before him once, strictly for a remand. He says to my lawyer, why isn't he in custody? He says, this is strictly for a remand. You were the only judge available. Well, I think I should put him in custody. The judge says, well, I made arrangements with the Crown Attorney. He says, all right, get him out of here. Now, a while later...
Well, Marvin, I just want to hold on for a second, because we lost track of Savage for a second. And I just want to... So Inspector Savage, now he called you because of your performance on the Proverbs case, right?
Right.
So...
What happened was this. After I testified against Proverbs, and Proverbs was found guilty, Savage, who was a very unemotional person, gave me a big hug and told me what a great job I did testifying. And one day I get a call from Savage, and he says, I want to take you for lunch. I said, why? You got a warrant for me for something? He says, no, I wouldn't take you for lunch if I had a warrant. I want to talk to you. He took me for lunch. He says, I want you to meet somebody. An officer comes in by the name of Detective Robbie Robinson, who specialized in informants. He says, you did such a great job. I'm turning you over to Robinson. You're going to become an informant for the OPP. You'll get paid for cases you do, and anytime we take you out for meals, everything will be paid for. I says to myself, screw these guys. I'm not going to be their informant. I'll get as much money as I can from them, and as much free meals, but I'm not going to work for them. They don't have to know that. A short time after that, some guys come up with a scheme. They had phony certified checks that they want cash. They were certified, but they were phony. Because of my background, they invited me into the deal. We have the meeting, and afterwards I say to myself, these guys really think I'm stupid. They want me to take the big chances, and they give me the short end. Now I got hot. I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to give this to the coppers. And that's what I did. And it worked out well. The deal went down. They all got convicted. And the OPP turned me into an informant. Now, that was a rough ball game. This Robinson was trained in his craft, and he became friendly with me. And during conversations, I had told him about things I did years back that nobody caught me for. So anytime he wanted me to be an informant, and I didn't want to be because I liked the person or whatever, he would tell me, you're doing it or you'll be in big trouble. So the government told me.
So the other people reached out to you for some deals, and I thought I'm just going to ask you a couple stories that you told me, but one I found particularly interesting, that you got a call around 1985 from John Gotti.
Now, I get a call.
Now, this is when you're an informant, right?
I was an informant for the OPP. When I was an informant for the OPP, they owned me. They were my bosses. They paid me. They loaned me out to different forces like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Metro Police, the FBI, Mexican Federales, Detroit PD, New York PD, U.S. Customs, Ecuador Police, Scotland Yard.
So while you're doing all this work, Gotti calls you.
Now, Gotti did not know about my informant situation.
Obviously.
Gotti calls me. He says, "You've got a reputation as being a very reliable driver. I've got some work for you. I'm going to send you some money for a ticket. Come down to New York. I want you to meet me at a place called the Raven Club." I went down and I met John Gotti. He says, "Mr. Gotti, pleasure to meet you." He says, "You call me John." He says, "I've got a driving job for you. You're going to take myself and my friend Gravino to Sparks Steakhouse. You're going to let us off at Sparks Steakhouse, and then go drive a block away and wait for me." That's all he told me. I picked him up and his friend. I drove him to Sparks Steakhouse, and while I'm waiting, I hear shooting. I said, "Oh, Christ, something's wrong." They come back to the car. They weren't running, but they were walking fast. And John Gotti says, "Take me home to my home in Queens." On the way there, I had the radio on. And on the radio, they announced that Castellano had just been bumped off in front of Spark Steakhouse.
So, for those that don't know, Paul Castellano was the head of the New York mob at the time, and then John Gotti.
John Gotti thought he should have got the job, and they gave it to Castellano.
Right. So then Gotti became, as a result of that assassination, which ended up being committed by Gotti, that he became the head of the New York mob.
Now, what happened was, about a year later, Gravino was on another beat. The cops wanted Gotti much more than they wanted Gravino. Gravino made a deal to testify what happened, and they would let him off the charge. I get a letter from the U.S. Justice Department, just a letter, asking me to come to the trial as a witness. I go to my lawyer, I discuss it. He says, "Look, you don't have to go. It's not a subpoena. But at any time you're going to cross the border, they'll have your name there and you'll have a problem. They only want you as a witness. You have nothing to worry about. Go ahead." I go down and I get called and I witness. And I tell the story, exactly what happened, that I was a driver. I didn't know what was going on. John Gotti took the stand and he backed it up. They said, "How come you picked him as a driver?" He said, "Because he had a great reputation as being a very reliable driver for Jimmy Hoffa. So that's why I got a hold of him." He says, "Did he know what you were doing?" He says, "He knew nothing." Gravino took the stand and Gravino said the driver knew everything. He knew what we were going to do. I said to myself, "Jesus Christ, I got to get the hell out of here." I start to walk out of the courtroom. The judge says, "Stop that man." The bailiff stopped me, and they took me to a place called Rikers. I'm in there. A couple of days later, the Mr. Meyerowitz, Teamster lawyer, comes to see me. Says, "I made you a great deal." I said, "You did?" He goes, "Yes." I says, "What kind of deal?" He says, 30 years. I says, 30 years? Are you crazy? I says, "I got a young family in Canada." He says, "You didn't get life?" I says, "Yes, I did. 30 years is life. I got life." I says, "That's no deal." He says, "You didn't get the death penalty." I says, "Big deal. 30 years is life." He says, "There's only one way out. It might work." He says, "What's that?" He says, "I take you back to court and you testify again that you didn't know anything. And if the judge buys it, you'll be free to go." And that's what happened.
Well, that's one way out. So I'm going to ask you now, there was my note, I call it the drywall case. But I don't know if you want to expand on the Alvar.
What happened was this. Gaddafi had made arrangements to buy helicopters with special guns from New York, Montreal, and Toronto to fight Israel. The FBI got wind of it. They wanted to find out what was going on. They found out that the man representing Gaddafi in it was a guy called Mustafa Alabar. They sent agents with Arab backgrounds whose parents were from different Arab countries. He wouldn't buy them. Now, I had worked for the FBI in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, New York, Detroit, always with 100% success. So they phoned the OPP and they said, we need somebody to get close to this guy, Alabar. Will Marvin take a crack at it? They said, come in, we'll talk about it. We came in, and I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. I got to know a few things. What can you tell me about this guy, Alabar? He says, Alabar is a tennis nut. He loves to play tennis. He loves to go to tennis games. And he does his banking at the Spanish Bank in Toronto. Now, at that time, there was a drywall shortage in Canada and the United States. It was hard to get drywall. A friend of mine that used to live in Toronto had gone to work for big builders in Miami where he was building homes. I phoned him up and I said, look, if I can get you $2 million worth of drywall through my connections, can you get me a $2 million line of credit? He says, definitely, 100%. So now I go to the Spanish Bank and I ask to see the manager. And I tell him that I want to be a client and I've got a $2 million line of credit coming from Miami. He asked me from whom. I told him they were big builders. He checked it out and they said, yes, we made those arrangements. Now, I had no drywall, but I made these guys believe I did. So now this guy is very happy to see me, very happy to meet with me. And then I say to him, I said, I got a problem. He says, what's your problem? I says, a friend of mine who's a tennis pro is coming in from New York. I'm going to take him to some big tennis games. I have connections for tickets. I know nothing about tennis. Do you know anybody that can help me out? He says, let me make a phone call. He gets on the phone and he says, I've got a very big client here. I just got him. He needs some help with some tennis connections. Doesn't take long. Alabar shows up. He tells Alabar that I'm well connected. I've got this $2 million line of credit. And Alabar and I become friendly. Now we start seeing each other. And the deal is made where two agents from the FBI come in. They said they were from New York, but they weren't. They were from Buffalo. A young guy who was a great tennis player and an older guy who was to be with them. And I make arrangements with Alabar to take him out for dinner and to meet my friend, the tennis pro. And then I was going to get tickets for a great big tennis match. And he's going to be my guest. We all meet at the same hotel, myself and the OPP officer, my handler, Robinson, and the two FBI agents. Nobody brought any money. The FBI didn't have any money. Robinson didn't have any money. And they couldn't give me a quick government credit card to use. And I invited Alabar to be my guest. So I said, well, we have to call it off. The OPP sergeant says, you can't call it off. This is a big deal. You made the connection. You're going to have to get by it. Think of some way to get through it. You can't call it off. Think of something, but you can't call it off. So I says to the young agent who was coming with me for dinner, I said, when I give you a kick, excuse yourself and go to the washroom. We go to a restaurant, a very classy restaurant in Toronto called Carmen's Club. one of the greatest in Toronto at that time. And we're having a great time. We're eating and we're drinking. And then at a certain time, I give the agent the kick and he excuses himself. Now there's just me and Alabar at the table. And we had become buddies. I says, Mufta, I have a serious problem. Can you help me out? He said, well, what is it? I says, last week I went out of town to see a fighter that I might manage. I had my jacket in a locker. When I got back to Toronto, my wallet was gone. I don't know what happened. It had all my cash and my credit cards. I forgot all about it. I haven't got any money on me. Can you do me a favor and pick up the tab and I'll pay you back? He said, with pleasure. And he did. Now, they wanted to see Alabar's apartment. He was very careful about letting people up there. I says to him, Mufta, my buddy here says that he's been in the greatest apartments in the world. I told him there's nothing like yours. He says, come on up, I'll show it to him. We went up to the apartment. I don't know how the guy did it. He had a camera hidden somewhere. He took pictures of it. And they had a talk. And Alabar told them all about where the guns were coming from. They made the arrest. They stopped the guns. And led to the Lockerbie bombing where they bombed Gaddafi's castle. And everything went down very well.
Crazy. Now, that wasn't a circumstance where you're wearing a wire, but I just want to touch on one particular case when you wore a wire, and it was with Johnny Pops, or I guess it's Johnny Papalia.
Johnny Pops Papalia. Papalia had a deal where he was going to give out 40 mortgages. Now, Papalia knew me because he was very close friends with my foster brother, Roy Pasquale. So he knew me as a kid. And he knew me as being well-connected and having a lot of connections. Nothing about my working for the coppers. So he called me if I would help him out. Johnny and I didn't like each other, but business was business. And they wanted me to get everything on tape. The RCMP got involved, and they gave me a belt. Now, if you looked at the belt, you could tell that it was something wrong with it because it was very thick and it had wires in it. And that was the wire that I wore. It was a belt. So I had to wear a sweater over it so they couldn't see it. Now, I'm at a meeting, and Johnny is talking to me, and he says, let's talk over here. We're in his office. They might have this part of the room tapped. Another place, he moving me around. I kept saying to myself, you dumb jerk, you're moving the wire with you. Now we're sitting down, and we're at the meeting. There's Johnny, his two brothers, and his nephew, and his lawyer, and a big mobster friend of theirs by the name of Howard Halpenny, and myself. And I've got the paper in my hand, a phony paper that I had made up, where I was going to help Johnny with these phony mortgages. Johnny looks at me, and he reaches, and I've got the paper in my hand, and he reaches towards me, and it looks to me like he's reaching toward the wire. I says to myself, my God, he spotted it. What am I going to do? So the first thing I said to myself, as soon as Johnny grabs the belt, I'm going to say, you fag bastard, keep your hands off me, throw a shot and get the hell out of there as fast as I can. But Johnny didn't spot the wire. He wanted the paper. He took the paper out of my hand. Everything went well. The deal collapsed and everything went very good.
So Marvin, again, I'm going to just kind of move to a little different thing now. I mean, and those are really great stories, but a lot of the stories of that time and era are captured on film, and some of those stories are, you may or not even have been around for in that time. And so I'm just maybe want to get some commentary by you on what popular culture and the movies have portrayed, and where you think maybe they got it right or where they got it wrong.
Well, they did a movie called Hoffa. Jack Nicholson played Mr. Hoffa. Danny DeVito played me. And he was also the director. And the movie was full of crap. It was all BS, the whole thing. Now, I did not like Danny DeVito. I came up to him one time and I said, Mr. DeVito, it didn't happen that way. I was a consultant for the movie. The movie was shot in Detroit. And he hired me as a consultant. As a matter of fact, he even let me bring George for a couple of the things. So he said, when I want to know something, I'll ask you. Nicholson came over to me, nice guy, put his arm around me. He goes, when movies are made, it's made that way. A lot of times it's not the truth. You're getting your money. Just answer the questions when they ask you questions and answer them to the best of your knowledge. And that was that. But the movie was full of BS. Now, another movie was made just recently called The Irishman. The producer was Scorsese. Scorsese sent me a contract if he could have somebody play me in the movie. And he had the guy's name, who was going to play me. The guy was playing Hoffa's driver, Marvin the Weasel Elkind, young, good-looking kid. Now, the movie wound up being 3.5 hours. Originally, it was 4.5 hours. They cut out an hour, and most of my part was cut out, which I was very upset about. I researched the movie. The movie was all full of baloney. The whole thing was full of crap.
Well, so without moving on past Hoffa, I guess I'll ask the one question a lot of people are wondering, and I know that you have a definite theory. So tell me, where is Hoffa?
Now, Mr. Hoffa is in the concrete in the Renaissance Center Hotel in Detroit, Michigan. Here's what happened. Mr. Hoffa was in jail. In 1975, there was a big convention in Detroit to elect a new slate of officers, plus they were going to grant the starting of the Renaissance Center Hotel. They were going to start building it. McGuigan from Boston was on the slate as president. Mr. Hoffa was not on the slate. He had just gotten out of jail. Mr. Hoffa showed up in Detroit, and he had made arrangements to be nominated from the floor to run against McGuigan for president. The United States Justice Department hated Mr. Hoffa, hated him tremendously. He hated them, they hated him. Went way beyond business, personal hate. They told McGuigan and they told Tony Giacalone, the head of the Detroit Mafia, that if Hoffa gets elected, a poll was taken. The poll showed if Hoffa runs, he gets 90% of the vote. They said if Hoffa gets elected, the Justice Department will give the Teamsters as much trouble as they can. If he doesn't, they'll give them as much cooperation as they can. Mr. Hoffa, now this is all in the Teamster records. Anybody goes to a Teamster office in the United States, it's in the records. Mr. Hoffa was offered $500,000 by the Teamsters to retire. He turned it down. Now, while he was there, the FBI had 24-hour surveillance on him. He was picked up at an outdoor nightclub, outdoors. Somebody fell asleep at the switch or was paid to fall asleep at the switch. So they didn't get the license plates of the car. Now, the day before Mr. Hoffa went missing, we had a coffee together, strictly because I used to be his driver. And I said to him, I said, Mr. Hoffa, a lot of people are very upset about you running. It can give them a lot of trouble. Mr. Hoffa said to me, Marvin, my people will never harm me. Now, the concrete in the Renaissance Center was to be poured a month away. They were a month away from pouring the concrete. Mr. Hoffa goes missing. To pour concrete, they put down wooden planks and the concrete is poured in the planks. Mr. Hoffa goes missing. The next day, every Teamster carpenter in the state of Michigan, he could have been working on a high-rise or building somebody's rec room, it didn't matter. Every Teamster carpenter was called off the job to get those planks down. Mr. Hoffa was missing and they poured the concrete. That's why there's no question in my mind that Mr. Hoffa is in the concrete there. Now, a year later, there was a meeting at a hotel called the Omni, which is across the road from the Renaissance. And you can get from one to the other by the rooftops. You could walk from one rooftop to the other to take you to the hotel. You don't have to go outside. I was there at the convention on my job as an errand boy, make sure everybody had their drink when they wanted, their cigars were lit, whatever. The meeting lasted for 5 days. There were no phones allowed. Everybody was shut in. When it was over, they decided to have a change of scenery and have breakfast across the road at the Renaissance, just for a change of scenery. As we're all walking across, there's about 30 of us, when we hit the line from the Omni leading to the Renaissance, Tony Giacalone turns around and he says, say good morning to Jimmy Hoffa, boys. So that's why there's no question in my mind that wherever they say Mr. Hoffa is in the concrete at the Renaissance.
Incredible story. Marvin, I want to thank you for sharing your incredible stories with us. That's the end of our formal presentation. So if everyone wants to give a round of applause for Marvin Elkind, the Weasel.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much. I really did. You were a great interviewer.
Well, thank you.
I'll recommend you highly.
And I guess that's the end of our formal presentation. But if you, anyone from the audience would like to ask questions of Marvin, he's here and welcome to answer them.
How many fights do you have, Marvin?
Beg your pardon?
How many fights did you have?
77.
There was pro?
77 pro fights.
Anyone else? Well, there you have it. Again, Marvin, thank you very, very much for sharing your stories with us. And everyone, hopefully, oh, we got one more. Tony.
You guys go through the photos of who's being displayed on screen?
Sure. Marvin, just turn your attention up here. Some of these photos, maybe you can tell people who they are. When we have one that's not a movie poster.
Now that is my dear friend George Chavalo and myself. And I'm not sure who the fighter is. It was taken at the Boxing Hall of Fame. That's me at a black tie dinner deal. They have it every year at the Royal Hotel in Toronto. We're having it this year in April. It's a black tie deal where you have drinks, dinner, and you watch the fights. That's me and Muhammad Ali in Rochester, New York at a dinner. Me and Muhammad again. Me and George Foreman.
Did he give you a grill?
He wasn't in the grill business at that time, but he was a very nice guy, very friendly guy. That kid, the guy to the left is Tony Unitas. He was a fight announcer in Toronto. The kid in the middle holding the trophy was just picked as Canadian Fighter of the Year. I managed him and trained him. His name was Danny Stokes. I thought he was going to be a world champ. Before he met his fiancée, you couldn't get him out of the gym. You got him into the gym to train. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay and train and train and train. He met his fiancée, then you couldn't get him back in the gym. That ended his career. That's one of my better pictures. That's me, and I believe that's Sonny.
Sonny Liston.
Sonny was a great guy. He was not the guy in the ring, outside of the ring. He was a great party guy, a lot of fun. I like Sonny. Sonny came to Toronto to meet with Chavalo. Chavalo was fighting at Maple Leaf Gardens. I picked Sonny up at the airport, and a fight was arranged. Sonny was supposed to fight George. Sonny got murdered before the fight.
Now, this story, and I guess the official story is that Sonny overdosed.
Now, Sonny was found in Las Vegas with needles in his arm. Sonny was terrified of needles, terrified, so he wouldn't have done it. Now, Sonny had had a big argument at a convention with a man called Meyer Lansky. I heard about it. I called Sonny, and I said, Sonny, straighten this out. He says, why? Who's this? Just little nobody. I says, he's the money man for the mob. They will do things to please him. Straighten it out. It was shortly after that they found. There's no question in my mind they killed Sonny. Sonny wouldn't have committed suicide, not that way.
And he was scheduled to fight Chavalo.
He was scheduled to fight Chavalo. Mr. Hoffa.
And background.
That's me. I believe I was picking up Floyd Mayweather. Floyd came in for a press conference before his fight with the Irish kid. The guy sitting next to me there is Jimmy Baccarani. He was a cousin to my foster brother, Roy Pasquale, and he wanted to be a gangster, but he was too nice a guy. That's a flight attendant that we use for different situations.
We'll just wait till the camera's off. You can ask.
That's it.
That's it. There we go. Everyone again. Marvin Elkind.
Thank you. And I want to thank the people that took care of me on the way here. I was treated fantastic, treated tremendously. It's been a lovely time. I've been in hotels because of my traveling with the government and traveling with Chavalo. Hotels all over the world, the greatest hotels. None of them are as nice as this one, as the hotel I stayed in. And I was just treated fantastically, and I really appreciate it very much. Anytime you people want me back, I'll be glad to come.
Reginald.
A couple of them, if I might, Steve. One, we used to deal with a fellow by the name of Lorenzo Calci, also known as Pasquale in Montreal. You've mentioned the Pasquale name many times this evening. Is that sort of a nickname? Is there...
No, Pasquale is the family name of his foster family.
No, Pasquale. When I was in foster care, when I was 9 years old, I became what was known as a ward of children's aid. And my stepfather, who I didn't get along with, made arrangements, said I was causing too much trouble at home, so they made me a ward of children's aid. And I was put into this Sicilian home of a family called Pasquale. And while I was there, the old lady wanted me to be registered in the school in the area by their name, Pasquale. And she said, Marvin Pasquale doesn't sound right. So she changed my name to Mario. So for the 2 years that I lived there, I was Mario Pasquale. A lot of people still call me Mario.
Second question, if I might. A few years ago, Brent and I went to Memorial Day service in Detroit. And after the service at the cemetery, we went across to a bar west of Woodward, maybe half a mile, and back in a few streets. In that bar was a telephone booth in the corner. And the statement was made that Jimmy Hoffa made a lot of telephone calls from there.
At that bar, Mr. Hoffa had 2 phone booths.
Two phone booths, okay.
Right, one which he didn't care if people knew about, one which was very private.
That makes more sense. Okay, but there was a telephone booth in the corner, a wooden one, full size like we used to see around occasionally.
That would be the private one.
That was the private one. Thank you, sir.
You're quite welcome.
What was the name of the bar? Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Nancy Whiskey.
What was it, Brent?
Nancy Whiskey.
Nancy Whiskey.
Yes,
See, Brent's younger than both of us. So he
we used to eat a lot of meals at a place in Detroit. It was a steakhouse. I just can't remember the name now.
Chop House?
Pardon?
The Chop House?
Carl's Chop House.
All right.
Steve, if you want to draw the recorded conclusion, and if there are any other things that we want to add, we can.
What was the question?
I think we're good. Are we good? I think we're good. We're good? All right.
Going with the,
I got one quick one.
go ahead, Don.
Oh, are we? I'm sorry. Yeah. So we've got a special little something. What's
Excuse me, it's the Parkinson's.
So, I'm pretty young, but I've been around a little bit. Now my family has been involved with the Detroit Athletic Club, the oldest club in Detroit, Michigan. And, you know, it always kind of seems to come around to the point where the general consensus is something happened at the rent center at some point. Generally, what's the consensus is like Jimmy Hoffa's in the rent center or something like that. Would you be able to tell whether or not whether he's actually there?
Many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think he was explaining earlier that he believes he's in the concrete in the foundation of the Ren Center because they quickly poured it a month early, the day after Hoffa disappeared. So
makes perfect sense to me as well.
It's now a GM building.
Right, of course, yeah. On top of that, like Detroit Athletic Club, they're in there now. But Hoffa would be more or less probably in there. Think.
Mr. Hoffa's in the concrete there.
Okay. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
So everybody, it's actually going to be Marvin's 86th birthday next week. It's the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
I think I'll spend the day in bed.
So I think Brent and Corey got a little something special. So maybe we could just sing "Happy Birthday" to Marvin. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Marvin. Happy birthday to you. All right. Good trip, Candace.
There you go. You just got one girlfriend.
You know, there's no question in my mind. I was born on Friday the 13th. I think the way my life turned out, my mother going to the hospital must have walked under a ladder. And a black cat must have crossed her path.
All right. So enjoy some cupcakes and a glass of wine, and feel free to say hello to Marvin.
And I want to say thank you very much. I've been treated fantastic. I had a great time. The people here taking care of me have just been tremendous. And it was just great interview. I enjoyed it very much. And you're a terrific group of people.